to our lesson on this evening. Do we have any questions or concerns? Seeing no hands, uh, we want to pick up where we left off on last week. We were discussing the attributes of love in First Corinthians chapter 13, and talking about the fact that love is behavioral, it's not just emotional. And as we were talking about the four words used for love from the Greek language, and how agape is the highest form of love. In the husband-wife relationship, we certainly find application to all four of those Greek words. Agape, phileo, storge, and eros. Agape being the highest form of love, unconditional acceptance. It is an unselfish concern for your fellow man. Phileo is friendship love. And we may not be friends with everybody, but we certainly ought to be friends with our spouse. Storge is love for family members. And certainly the husband and wife in a one flesh relationship, they have a close familial tie. They're more than family, they're spouses, one with another. And then we talked about eros, which is sexual love, that sexual desire that a husband and wife should have. But in 1 Corinthians 13, we find mainly agape being discussed here, and what Paul is talking about. We read verses 4 through 8, and we were discussing last week, we stopped on verse 5, and it seems that the attribute of love being not easily angered, we got a lot of mileage out of that one. And the thing that we've got to consider is that when we love somebody, that we are supposed to be long-suffering with that person, even as Paul started out, that charity suffereth long, or love is patient. We've got to be long-suffering. We've got to bear with people, because sometimes even in a marriage relationship, we become difficult one with another. Sometimes I am difficult with my spouse. Sometimes the spouse is difficult with me. And so we should not be easily angered, but we should be long-suffering with one another. As we were talking on last week, it's a bad situation when one walks into the house and the attitude of a person changes. As we said, the hair stand up on the back of your neck, or you just become sour just because your spouse walks in. That doesn't make for a good relationship. Certainly, we should not be easily angered with our spouse. We should know our spouse very well. And as a matter of fact, rather than being easily angered, we should feel a sense of relaxation and security when the spouse comes in. When the spouse comes, it ought to be a good feeling and not a negative feeling. Not only should one not be easily angered. But then one of the things I think is important in verse number 5, it says, love keeps no records of wrongs. Now, that's the NIV rendering. It keeps no records of wrongs. And I think that is very important in the marital relationship. That whenever things occur, whenever bad things occur, because we're going to have our differences and our difficulties in the relationship, but you don't hold on to those things. If somebody did something that negatively impact the relationship, you don't continue to hold on to that and use that against your spouse. One of the things that we are supposed to do is we're supposed to forgive one another. Now, if I forgive my spouse, if I love my spouse and I pray for my spouse, I have compassion for my spouse, I'm being kind to my spouse, one of the things that we learn to do is forgive one another. Now, forgiving does not mean that we forget, because we have that old saying, you got to forgive and forget. Well, we can forgive, but we do not necessarily forget. But even though we might have a remembrance of something offensive, we do not hold that against our spouse. If you keep records of wrongs, if you keep tabs on things that your spouse have done in the relationship and it impacts the relationship negatively, and you keep bringing those things up every time something happens, you keep bringing up what you did 13 years ago or 3 months ago or however long it was, that can keep tension in the relationship. There will always be tension. That person will never feel like they have your trust because you keep bringing up things from way back. And these things can provide or can cause a barrier and create a wedge in the relationship that can drive a couple apart. So one of the things that we ought to do is we ought to forgive. To forgive means that you don't hold it against the individual. Again, it doesn't mean that you forget. You might well remember, but you do not let that be a barrier in the relationship. You do not keep bringing it up so that you use it against that individual. And people tend to do that sometimes because if somebody just, inadvertently criticize, you say, well, you can talk about me doing this, but you did that. And you always doing this, and you always doing that, and you just keep bringing those things up. Well, that's not helpful in the relationship because it's almost like you're keeping score, and we're going to see who can keep the most wrongs against the other. And that's not the way that it should be in the relationship. Rather than keeping records of wrongs, we need to let those wrongs go and we need to forgive. That's what agape does. Agape does not keep records of wrongs. And so this is something that we certainly need to learn to do in relationships. It will take away a whole lot of tension. It'll take away a whole lot of strife, and it'll make things go a whole lot smoother when you don't hold things against one another. Then in verse number 6, Paul says, love does not delight in evil, but rejoices with the truth. And certainly we should not delight in doing negative things or spiteful things to one another. And these things happen in some relationships. There are some relationships where husband and wife are spiteful to one another. That does not make for a good, harmonious relationship. How in the world can you be spiteful to the person that you lay down and sleep next to, or you be spiteful to the person that's preparing your meals, or you be spiteful to a person that's providing security and income for you? That's just not a good thing. What you've got to have in that relationship is some trust. You have definitely got to be able to trust one another that you're going to do what is in the best interest of the other. And that is even what Paul taught in Ephesians chapter 5, that the husband should love his wife as he loves himself. If I love myself, I'm not going to do anything mean or spiteful against me. Then I certainly should not do anything mean or spiteful against my spouse. And the wife is supposed to have the same kind of love for the husband, to where she really loves her husband as she loves herself. And really, our love for our spouse should be just as much or greater than our love for ourselves. And it's as we have discussed in Philippians chapter 2, we ought to esteem others, and especially your spouse. You ought to esteem your spouse well-being beyond your own. And if we have that kind of love for our spouse, if I seek the highest good for my spouse, and my spouse seeks the highest good for me, then we can have a good relationship, a beautiful relationship. But if I'm thinking about things whereby I can oppress her or dominate her, that's not going to be a good relationship. We don't need to be trying to one-up one another, one trying to get the best of the other, and there's this competition of who can get the best. Love does not delight in evil, but it rejoices with the truth. And you know, it says, Jesus said, the truth will make you free. When we trust one another, when we can depend on one another, then that makes for a good relationship. I don't need to be doing things to deceive my spouse so that I can have my way. She don't need to be doing things to deceive me so that she can have her way. But we ought to be able to trust one another that we're doing what is best for the relationship. I'm doing what's best for her, and she's doing what's best for me. We can have some trust. We can have some security in that kind of relationship. But if I'm always concerned about what she's doing, and if I'm concerned about where she's going and who she's talking to and who she's with, well, that doesn't make for a good relationship. I have worked with men over the years who could not do their job well because they're concerned about what their wife is doing, or women concerned about what their husband is doing. That just doesn't make for a good relationship. But when folks act deceptively with one another, then you have that distrust. You have that suspicion. And there shouldn't be that kind of suspicion in your relationship. And I'm gonna call up another one of those Harold Melvin and the Blue Note song. You know, after we've been married so long, he said, if you don't know me by now. We've got to learn one another. And we've got to know how to encourage one another and how to strengthen one another and how to strengthen our relationship. And we do that by doing things that promote trust rather than doing deceptive things that promote distrust. And so love definitely does not delight in wrongdoing or in evil, or, just being deceptive, but it rejoices in the truth. And it's like I've said, the husband-wife relationship should be an open, transparent relationship. I shouldn't have any secrets that I'm keeping from her. She shouldn't have any secrets that she's keeping from me. And she shouldn't have to worry. When I'm leaving and going places, she shouldn't have to worry. And many of you probably remember when I first started out in Manning, I was up in Manning all the time, days and weekends. And Mary was in Georgetown. I was in Manning. And if I had to worry about what she was doing in Georgetown while I was in Manning, I'd have been a nervous wreck. As a matter of fact, I probably wouldn't be able to do some of the work that I did in Manning. And if she had to worry about me, what I was doing in Manning, because she couldn't see me, I couldn't see her. But I believe that the one thing that husbands and wives should remember is that whether I can see her or whether she can see me, God can see both of us. And I think one of the things that should keep husbands and wives, should keep all Christians really, is we need to remember in the book of Hebrews. Look in the book of Hebrews very quickly in chapter 4. And I certainly always like verse number 12. And many of us are familiar with verse number 12. But look at verse number 13. Because the word of God should certainly govern our thoughts and our behaviors. But verse 13 says, neither is there any creature that is not manifest in his sight, but all things are naked and open unto the eyes of him with whom we have to do. Whether Mary could have seen me or not, God always had his eyes on me. Whether I could see Mary or not, God always had his eyes on her. And I believe when we understand the fact that I can deceive my spouse, but I can't deceive God, if we are really concerned about pleasing God, then we will not try to be deceptive to our spouse. Because I can lie to my spouse for years. But if I've done wrong, God knows. And when I stand at the judgment, I can't slick talk God. That ain't the best place to be telling a lie anyhow at the judgment. And especially when God knows all. And so if we just do what is right, as Paul said, if we just rejoice with the truth, rejoice in the truth, then we won't have to worry about those deceptive things that we've done. Too many people trying to do things, having their own way, trying to be slick, trying to be deceptive, when God sees it all. We cannot hide from God. And so that's why it's important not to try to hide or be deceptive with your spouse. We don't have to develop this clandestine life to where I'm acting like James Bond. I'm deceptive in my dealing with this one and deceptive in my dealing with that one. Just be honest with your spouse. And that makes for the best relationship, again, it builds trust and it builds security. Not only does love rejoice in the truth, in verse number 7, Paul said, it always protects. Always protects. What we've got to do is we've got to protect. Certainly the husband is supposed to protect the wife, but the wife also needs to protect the husband. Because even though the husband is the knight in shining armor, he needs some security also. He needs to know that he's got somebody that he can trust, somebody that's got his best interest at heart. She has got to protect his heart. She's got to protect his manhood, as well as he protect his wife, protect her womanhood, protect her dignity, her integrity. They've got to provide that protection, that support for one another. And again, I say that's what Paul is talking about in 1 Corinthians chapter 7, when he talks about rendering due benevolence. Rendering due benevolence is not just talking about the physical love. It's not just talking just about eros, but it's also talking about phileo. It's talking about that friendship. It's talking about that support that you can have. Because we're not one-dimensional beings. We don't need just the physical attention, but we also need emotional and spiritual and social interaction. And husbands and wives provide that for one another. I don't know, but I always, even in going different places, it was always good to have Mary there. I could lean on her and she could lean on me. We were there to support one another. If we didn't know anybody else, or we went to a strange place or whatever, we always had one another. That provided some support. That provided some protection. That provided what I needed for her, and she provided what I needed for me. And so the thing that we can do is we can protect one another, or provide that security, that trust, that backup for one another. I think I see a hand, Angie, Jerry.
Yes, I wanted to add something, in light of, the scriptures. Well, coming up in the church, I've always heard it say, you shouldn't marry someone, you should marry a Christian.
Mm-hmm.
And, ministers always go to, what is that verse? It's saying something about being unequally yoked.
2 Corinthians 6.
Yes. And I wanted to say, so if it was a couple, one person being a Christian and one person not being a Christian, there's some brothers, ministers that won't marry the couple. Mm-hmm. But would it be wrong for you to marry and unite the couple to perform a wedding? Would that be putting you in jeopardy, or it wouldn't really matter? I mean, as long as the marriage, I know the marriage would still be legal, of course, and in the it would be still the right thing to do regardless of whether they're both Christians or not. But I know some ministers, a lot of them in the church, they won't. So I mean, what is your stand with that? Why does ministers feel like they don't need to do that? Marry two people that are you know, not one non-Christian and one is a Christian.
My position is I discourage the joining of a Christian with a non-Christian because of your values. Somebody trying to live for God and you have a person who have no regard whatsoever for God and his word in trying to encourage you and help you to secure your soul salvation, that can make for a difficult relationship. And I've told folks that whenever you find a Christian marrying a non-Christian, more than likely 9.99 out of 10 times, you're going to have trouble with your father-in-laws. And I'm talking about God and the devil. Because I've seen more often than not, Christians marry non-Christians, males and females. When a Christian marries a non-Christian, the tendency is for that Christian to drift away from Christ.
Yeah, I know of a case.
I know of a bunch.
Unfortunately, I mean, you know, he went back. He started going. Well, she was a non-Christian. Well, is a non-Christian, but she was in the denomination. She was religious, but in the denomination. And unfortunately, he was in the church, but he started going to church with her. Mm-hmm. And he still to this day goes to church with her. Mm-hmm. And you know, that's how that ended up.
I've known quite a few situations like that. I do know of a few situations where a few young ladies in the church married non-Christian husbands, and the husbands were converted. But the majority of cases that I know with a Christian marrying a non-Christian, they become weak and start drifting away and eventually leave the church. And so that's the problem. The values are different. Their theology, what they understand about God, is different. People in denominations, they have a commitment to, they have knowledge of God, they're Christian minded, but then being Christian minded and being a Christian are two different things. And they have the tendency to put more trust in those preachers, the men, and what they say than what the word of God says. And you got folk in denominations who are very committed to their preacher. They're committed to religion, but they're not committed to the gospel of Christ. And there's a difference in the two. And so whenever you have a couple in that situation, it can be very difficult for the Christian to be strong and to be faithful to Christ. And so that's why I discourage it. If that Christian is intent on getting married, they can certainly marry. And especially if that person is eligible, if that person is scripturally eligible to marry, they can marry. But you're going to have to be a strong Christian in order to maintain and be faithful to Christ.
Oh, okay. Yeah. And of course, that's when you would encourage, well, some ministers in the church would encourage counseling.
Yes.
In a case like that before they wait.
Yes. Yeah. And that definitely needs to be dealt with in premarital counseling, because that difference in their theology. If one's trying to make it to heaven, if that's important, then you need to be sure you got somebody who's going to help you make it to heaven, not somebody who's going to drag you away from heaven. So,
Okay.
but it's not a sin to marry a non-Christian,
Right.
but it can be a
Yeah.
problem for your Christianity.
Okay.
Okay.
All right.
Yeah. So again, having the same values and as I was saying, rendering due benevolence, we've got to be able to support one another and help one another. A part of that protection, you helping me to secure my soul. I certainly want somebody to help me to make it to heaven. I don't want to miss out on heaven. And if we've got somebody that can help us with that, and as I've said over the years, if you're looking for a spouse and you want a Christian, if you're a member of the Manning congregation, if there's nobody in Manning there for you, you're not a tree. You can move around. You can go elsewhere. You know, visit other congregations. They have these singles retreats and things of that nature. Go and meet some Christians elsewhere. Go to other congregations and see if you can find you a Christian spouse. But you want to find a Christian young man. You got a lot of young men in the church that aren't Christians. Because I can remember my girls telling me, I was always encouraging them, you need to date, guys that are in the church. Daddy, the guys in the church are worse than the guys that ain't in the church. Well, that's bad. That's a bad commentary. But that's why we've got to teach folk. We've got to teach young men and young women, to maintain their integrity as Christians. And in this promiscuous world that we live in, it's a hard thing to be chaste. And you've got to be confident in your Christianity, because there are some people that if you are a young man and you're still a virgin, or in this case nowadays, even a young woman, and you're still a virgin, they look at that as something to ridicule you about. But you've got to understand the virtue of maintaining your integrity as a Christian and being chaste for Christ. So there again, you need to be secure in your Christianity. Know why you're living the way you're living.
Yeah, you are you.
Yeah.
Yes, sir.
A little Bible talk, 1 Corinthians chapter 7. Bible says better to marry than to burn, but when it comes to young people, they're not understanding these days. So, especially when they don't have the finance needs, what do you do situation like that? When young people, these days, anything goes, come to sex.
Yeah.
But you still don't have the finance. So how can they get married, not the finance, and still want to do whatever?
The finance.
No.
Yeah, and I understand that if they're not able to have their own place, and a young man, young woman want to marry, but they can't be on their own. They're still living with mom and daddy. What are they supposed to do? Well, they're supposed to wait. That's what they're supposed to do. I think we've got to teach our children. We got to have frank conversations, some very candid conversations with our children as they're growing up, as they get in their teenage years. The thing that parents need to understand is that your children are having these sexual conversations and these tempting and the attraction of the opposite sex and all of that is going on with our teenagers as they're growing up. We have to help them to understand the dangers of these pitfalls. We've got to help our sons and our daughters, because you know there are folks who think, well, we got to teach our girls, you know, because a girl can get pregnant. Well, true, a girl can get pregnant, but a young man can get so distracted, he can get so distracted chasing after these girls that he don't do what he's supposed to do academically. And if he doesn't do well academically, he's not going to be able to make it to the next level. If he can't go to college, or some of them do so poor academically that they can't even get in the military, because nowadays the military is not taking, you know, people that's academically low. You've got to score high on the ASVAB to be able to get in the military. And so if they hadn't done what they're supposed to do, it's going to be hard for that young man to be able to make it. And they don't have the industries anymore like they used to have back in the 60s, 70s, and 80s. You didn't need a college degree. You could just, you know, go to one of these plants and get a job and make a decent living. Well, those industries are gone. And it's hard for young men to make a decent living. And if he doesn't understand the importance of getting his education, taking care of business in school, but he's trying to be the school Don Juan, chasing one girl right after another, he's going to miss out. And those girls are going to move right on and leave him right there. And he's going to be with mom and daddy. And no, he might want to get married, but he's not going to be able to because he doesn't have the resources. And so besides all of that, we have to talk candidly with our children, the things that can hinder them, because a young lady getting pregnant and having a child can be a hindrance to her in her furthering her career. But you know, besides all of these things, we've got to talk to our children candidly about venereal disease, because they might talk about sex, they might talk about how cute one is and how good it feels and all of that stuff, but nobody talks about the disease. And there's nobody out there that's afflicted with a venereal disease that's got a tag on their forehead that said, I've got AIDS, or I've got syphilis, or I've got whatever. And some of that stuff is just so deadly that only death will cure. Now they think that they got AIDS by the handle now, that, you know, they've got drugs that can pretty much minimize AIDS to the point to where it doesn't, you know, it's not traceable. You can't even detect it. But there are other diseases out there, and these things are morphing all the time. And we got to talk to our children about those dangers also. Because if they get a venereal disease, it can affect them for years to come. And so we've got to equip our children. We've got to talk to them about the importance. What's really important, their number one job, and I think we've got to teach them, and that's the parents' responsibility. We assist the school in teaching our children, but we make sure they get their academics. But parents, we also got to make sure they get their spirituality. They don't just need to learn reading, writing, and arithmetic. They need to learn about Jesus also. And we need to teach them the virtue of being good young men and young ladies, and why it's important for them to wait. Because these immature children chasing after sex, they're not doing nothing but heaping up trouble for themselves. And so we have to help our children to understand that, and help them to understand that if you want to be a man, if you want to be a woman and have your own house and your own family and be able to stand, and we certainly have to help our daughters, because sometimes they might think a young man is so fine and he looks so good and I just love him so. But if that young man is a dud, if she marries a dud, she's gonna have a hard time. And if she marries a dud, she might wind up back with mom and daddy. With mom and daddy, you not only got your child, but now you got your child's children. And so we've got to help them to equip themselves so that they can be able to stand on their own in these situations, and help them to learn how to select a mate. And I believe if you establish that relationship with your children as they're growing up, and you develop that trust with your children to where they can come and talk to you about these issues, and you're giving them good information in that regard, then your children will rely on your good counsel. Because we continue to counsel our children even after they're grown up, even after they are married. The one thing we ought to do is we have to give good counsel in their marriage. Don't meddle in their marriage, but give good counsel, encourage them in their relationship with one another. And so if we don't equip our children, if we don't prepare them, then no, they're not going to be able to marry and get on their own, establish a home and a family of their own. And that's a bad thing, because if we've got children that's having children out of wedlock to where they're not marrying, but you know, one baby is a mistake, but when you start having 2 and 3, and you know, that's just beyond a mistake. And again, we have to talk to our children, because if you've got unmarried children out there conducting themselves like that, we just got to talk frankly that's not good. And you know, in more cases than not, whenever that happens, that impacts the parents, because the parents have got to help out in those situations. So we got to try to raise them right the first time, because if we don't, then we got to keep doing these refresher courses. Does that make sense to you, Jerry?
Yeah.
Emma?
No, that's true what you're saying. And you know, even sometimes when you do talk with them and train them and teach them and tell them, they still do what they want to do.
Yeah.
You know, so they have to have that mind that I want to, you know, take this path, you know. Mm-hmm. But remember, like how you said, and she batted them eyes at him and stuff like that.
Yeah.
Sometimes it's not the young man. Sometimes it's the woman that's doing the more chasing, you know, than the young man, you know. But normally, when you done talk with them and you done teach them and you done, you know, brought them up, you know, and got them through high school, and you encourage them to go, you know, even take to school, get a trade. Mm-hmm. But sometimes that doesn't work.
Yeah.
They choose their own path. They decide to choose their own path. Sometimes it's good and sometimes it's not.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. And sadly it impacts them, because we got a lot of young people who want things, mm-hmm. but they think it's going to come easy.
Exactly.
and it's not going to come easy. We've got some young people who feel that they're entitled, that you're supposed to do things for them, but they have got to forge their own lives, and we've got to try to help them to understand that, equip them so that they do what they have to do from elementary school, and we got to start in elementary school, and that's what parents have got to learn, that education has got to be important, because these kids don't understand why. I can remember in high school, I had this old teacher who was trying to teach me trigonometry, and I didn't need no trigonometry. What am I going to do with trigonometry? And you know, this old guy, a little old white guy, Mr. Cortland, but he would tell us about trigonometry, and we don't need a. He gets so mad. I got mine. But I graduated high school, went in the military, came back and got a job at International Paper Company, and I decided I wanted to get on maintenance. And the Lord blessed me, I was able to get on maintenance. I got on maintenance, and they put me in with the pipe fitters. Do you know what pipe fitters use to fit pipe? Trigonometry.
Yeah, but
Well, I remember Mr. Cortland. I didn't want it then, but thanks be to God, I was in an apprenticeship program to where they taught trade math. I learned that trigonometry. But if I had gotten it when he was trying to teach me, I could have been that much further ahead.
Right.
But you see, young people don't understand that some of the things that they're learning in school, they don't see any need for it now. I don't need it. Well, you don't know what you're going to need later on in life.
Exactly. Yeah. Yeah. You know, I was just thinking about just like our son that, you know, spent almost 10 years in the military. Nothing. What does he have to show for it? Nothing. Almost 10 years, you know, and then you have a family, you get married, you know, 2 kids, you know, and stuff like that, and living with your mother-in-law, you know.
Yeah.
Because he don't listen, because he won't listen.
Yeah. And like I said, life is hard.
Yeah.
Things are not going to come easy. We got to make some sacrifices, and we've got to work. And it's like I said, those industrial jobs that paid good money on the hour, where a person could make a decent living, those just aren't out there anymore. And so we're going to have to work, and that's why nowadays it takes both the husband and the wife working in order to make ends meet. But that's why it also takes the man helping out in the house with the family. Because if the wife is going to help bring in the bread, then you got to help wash the dishes and scrub the floors and stuff. Susie?
Yeah, I just kind of comment on what Elmo was saying. We got to remember, all we can do is teach a person. That's just like the gospel. All we can do is teach people. We can't make them obey what we teach. So we got to feel good about what we do. We did what we're supposed to do, but we can't just make them do what they don't want to do. And sometimes we allow that to be a big disencouragement for us, because they're not doing what we want to do. But we got to have an attitude that, well, I teach that person. So they got to choose to do what right according to the Bible, or go their own way.
Yeah. And if they fail to take the instruction, then it impacts their lives.
Yeah.
Also,
Go ahead.
you know, comment on what you said earlier, about the person that's unsaved and the saved person. And a lot of times, you know, we as in the church, we push a person, a saved person, you push that person to be baptized, the unsaved person to get baptized. And when we push that person to get baptized so that you could get married, or so that the minister that you want to marry you, you know, and that's baptism for the wrong reason.
Yes.
You know, because a lot of time that happens, which is I have a cousin, you know her well too. Her husband, that's the reason she's in the church today, is because he wanted to marry her, so he makes sure that she was baptized before they got married. And where is he? He leaves the church, but she is still faithful, you know, so it could have worked both ways, you know, so yeah.
Yeah, that's why we've got to teach our children, and we got to help them to understand that takes many conversations, and it would be great if we could tell them one time and they got it, but teaching is repetitive. We got to tell them over and over, and we've got to show them examples. We've got to point out situations. And you can show your children people who've made bad decisions. In every community, there are people who made bad decisions. And you got to point out those things to your children. That makes life real. And if you don't want to be in that bad situation, then you've got to make better decisions. And you've got to put forth the effort to make your life better. Because you can't stay with me. You got to go. and so that's what we've got to help our children. It is almost 8 o'clock. Any other questions or concerns before we close out?